Oh. Okay. Well, thank you, Glenn. When I came tonight, Glenn asked me to say a few things, although I myself am a visitor here, coming here from New York. But I'm delighted to be here at this gathering of Tibet, and especially with the presence of our distinguished writer from Dharamsala, Jamyang Norbu, who is the leader of a very important movement to revive Tibetan culture by making it expand to incorporate some of the other world's cultures. The only person who is translating things into Tibetan through his Amne Machen Institute. They plan to translate Hamlet into Tibetan, and the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence, and Moliere, and the day in the life. I think they've already done the day in the life of Ivan Denisovich of Solzhenitsyn. And which is a very true point that he makes, that language, a culture cannot remain alive. Tibetan culture was built up by centuries of translation of the greatest classics from Sanskrit, from Indian literature, and some from China and some from Central Asia. And it shouldn't ossify around that great Buddhist base, but should continue to transmit the literature of the world so that young Tibetans in future generations can read the classics. You know, we don't read Proust in French, most of us. You know, we don't read Dostoevsky in Russian, but it's part of our literature. So Tibetans similarly should be blessed, and we're very honored to have. I'm very honored to speak with Jamyang Norbu present, and his Amne Machen Institute needs tremendous support. It's part of the Tibetan movement. And then Gendon Rinchen is a great human rights activist who has spoken out so bravely in so many forums and has joined the ranks of the wandering in exile for the time being until the country is free again. And we're very grateful for his presence and for his speaking out, and very relieved that he got out of Tibet. And everybody I know who knows Gendon a lot, every time I'm going to see Gendon sometime, and they say, please tell him not to go back to Tibet. They're all scared he's going to go back and get caught. And I'm sure he won't. I'm relieved that he won't. And I personally work for my way. I've been in the movement since 1962 or 3, now going on 33 years. And I was... although the first few years of my Tibet sort of thing, I was more getting things from Tibet for myself, learning the Dharma, becoming a monk, trying to escape my WASP background by becoming a Tibetan, trying to squeeze this blonde head and this long bone body into a Tibetan frame, which didn't quite work, I think, somehow. But anyway, after a while, since I did learn some things that were of great value to me, after some years I began to realize that there were great things about Tibet, and I wanted to try to pay Tibet back in some way by helping them find some relief from the terrible, agonizing stress that they have suffered in the last 40 or 50 years. And so I'm always very heartened when I meet and greet, and I feel honored to greet a gathering of people who are supporting Tibet, because it is the great land grab of our century. It is the invisible genocide of our century. It is still going on, and people still play ball with these creeps who are perpetrating it and pretending like it never happened. And as I always like to say, the genocide is not just some poor Chinese soldier who's shooting his gun and mowing someone down, who's just been given an order and doesn't know what he's doing. But genocide is like, you know, people in the world, around the world, bureaucrats in governments, in our own government, who say, what, Tibet? Where's Tibet? Oh, isn't that China, part of China? They say. There are no Tibetans. The people who will deny the existence of Tibetans as a separate people are the people who are complicit in genocide, in my opinion, in fact, who pretend to confusion. Well, gee, are they really? Is Tibetan dialect, or is it a real language? This kind of thing, which you meet in governments and bureaucracies, you know. And so, in other words, by denying the existence of Tibetans as their own separate people that they are complicit. In fact, these governments, by business people saying, well, gee, we'd like to do something, but you know, there are those 1.3 billion customers for our shoelace that we produce, or our TV set, or whatever it is, our automobile. And this is really very sad to me. So therefore, I find that, and the second point is that the Tibetans are very frustrating for people who are trying to help them in the independence movement. They won't go and blow up a subway station or something, and they'll attract a lot of attention and do something ferocious. So people say, well, do they really want independence? They don't fight for it. You know, you hear this from some sort of people. And they are fighting in their nonviolent way. I mean, they did do a little guerrilla work in the 60s, some of them, but the country as a whole never rose like Afghanistan or like Vietnam, the other major countries that have fought off superpowers' attempts to dominate them in recent times. And they are fighting in this unique modern way where they are trying to make, under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, they are trying to make peace the method of achieving peace and freedom, rather than use violence to then achieve a supposed end of peace in the future. And therefore their campaign is something very also unique, which should not be punished for that fact, since they are embracing the goal that we all seek, which is peace in the world, as their method, even though they are physically suffering with their bodies a great deal of violence, and which they continue to do. And the situation that they are in now actually is a situation of tremendous violence, actually. People can go to Tibet as a tourist and see, but they don't really realize the violence that is taking place there. It's because it doesn't look like people are standing around. But actually all the young men are unemployed, sitting around playing pool, and somehow miraculously pool tables have appeared there. We don't know how they emanated from some pool table factory in Chengdu or something. And they're all out there playing pool, and they're being given cheap liquor. Some Chinese bureaucrat watched a lot of U.S. Westerns and saw all those Indians with the fire water, and they're plying these young men with cheap liquor. All the jobs are held by Chinese who are brought in from Chengdu and from Sichuan and from Gansu and Yunnan. And the Tibetan women get jobs working with those young men, but not the men, not the Tibetan men. And then they're just pushing people in mile a minute. They're draining the Yamdrok Lake. They are finally trying, Li Peng and Jiang Zemin are trying to, and Yao Shi are trying to do the final solution there. And the world sits by, and they find the Panchen Lama, and they do this. And it's really very, very sad. In a way, sometimes people in the Tibet movement think we've done great things lately because we have attracted more attention to Tibet and all this. But actually, nothing that has been done has had any good effect in China, and they are just pursuing it even more hotly. And they basically closed in for the kill, I personally believe, since the miracle happened from 89 and 1991, where Russia let go of the Baltic states and the Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, and that just terrified the people in Zhongnanhai, and they went for this final solution, which I'm certain will fail, by the way. I have no doubt in my mind that it will fail. The Chinese will eventually leave Tibet, and it will eventually be a free country again. I have absolute certainty on that point, which and I'm glad you... This is... But the longer the world allows them this kind of special license to continue with this attempt to finish off Tibet and assimilate it into the Chinese body, they will make more and more of a mess, like draining lakes and finishing off the trees and finishing off a lot of the people's lives, and it's really very, very unfortunate. So in that light, when one comes together with a gathering like this, all in our own humble way, the motley crew that we usually are, we the Tibet supporters, with our cultural institutions such as Tibet House, which I particularly work for, trying to make the culture of Tibet well known to people so that then they'll fall in love with Tibet, so that then they may eventually become into a more active role about it. The political movements like the International Campaign for Tibet, the U.S. Tibet Committee, the Old Veterans, and the International Lawyers Committee of Tibet, who are doing unique and marvelous work worldwide for Tibetan human rights and things. So it's incredibly moving to me. And I always like to try to be in the role of encouraging people, not to be discouraged, because, when you, as you know, I'm sure you all know, you tell someone, so, well, I went to a Tibet meeting, we're trying to save Tibet, trying to liberate Tibet, whatever they say. Oh, right. Actually, they used to tell us in the 70s, oh, you guys, I'm sure, are buddies with the Lithuanian independence movement. They used to tell us, because that was another hopeless case, supposedly. So we're hoping they say that now, right? Oh, yeah, like the Lithuanians. They'll get in the UN, definitely, And I like to encourage people, because I think a key thing in this movement is never to let the mind close and to adopt the hopelessness that is the real enemy, the hopelessness in our own mind, the hopelessness, the idea that there couldn't be any such change, which is what, of course, the oppressor and the aggressor and the invader and the occupier in this situation, the colonizer, wishes us to all feel hopeless. But it really isn't hopeless. I love, particularly in the Gandhi movie, I love this one line in the Gandhi movie, and I looked it up, it was in his biography, when he met with this one British general in the governor's mansion in India, in New Delhi, and the guy said to him, well, you don't really think after all we put into this colony, the crown and the jewel, do you, the guy with the swagger stick, you don't really think we're just going to walk right out of here, do you? And Gandhi looked up at him calmly and he said, I think walking will do fine. He said, I think walking would get you there. I love that one. It's so real, you know, still real. So anyway, actually, I shouldn't say too much because I'm supposed to talk again, and I don't want to bore you. But I just want to thank you all very much on behalf of the Tibet House and the Lawyers Committee by deputation for putting your effort and your time and your money into the cause of Tibet. And also, well, I'll speak later again, so I won't say any more. But I want to thank Glenn for organizing this, and all the members of the International Committee. Okay, just among us. Thank you.
Once again, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Glenn Gilbert. I'm the Executive Director of the International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet, and I'm also your Master of Ceremonies for the program tonight. What a turnout. This is really a sight to see. Everybody should take turns and come up here and take a look out at what I'm seeing. This is really fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. There's special thanks in the program that lists everybody that had anything to do with this, but I would like to especially point out and thank Cosette Thompson from Amnesty International, Joanne Bren, my right-hand woman for 3 or 4 weeks, even from Arizona, Tim Hodge, right-hand man, Stan Clark, chair of the Gendon Rinchen Committee and one of the people who worked as hard as anyone to try to free Gendon Rinchen and to succeed. Carol Daniels, Tashi Dundup, Gaia Bookstore, Jack Sampa, General Printing, John Herbert, Scott Harrison, Paul Kim, Richard Page, Sue Piozet, Aaron Potts of Milarepa Fund, Kerry Peovich, Chuck Pryor, Galen Rowell, Richard Swift, Paul White, Star Barron, Patrice Wynn, and Sewang. Thank you very much for all of your help. I just want to mention again that we have a Galen Rowell photograph in the back. I mentioned it to the dinner folks already, but the reception folks may not know that we're having a silent auction. Galen Rowell was generous enough to donate one of his most beautiful photographs, which is prominently displayed in My Tibet. It's star trails over Mount Kailash, 20-minute exposure. Everybody should have a look at it. It's at the back of the room by the entrance. It's silent auction, and I think the bid is $600 right now. Higher? It'll go all the way to the end of the night. Get your bid in. It's a beautiful, beautiful photograph. There will be a question and answer period at the end if there's time, and there are sheets at your tables where you can write a question down and give it to a member of your table who is a board member, or you can pass it to a volunteer who's standing up by the door, and they will pass them forward, and then we'll have the moderator, myself, read the questions so that we have it mic'd, because we don't have mics out in this very crowded room. The International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet advocates self-determination for the Tibetan people, and we need your help to do it. There are also remittance envelopes on the table. Remarkably, 65% of the people in this room are not members of the International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet. We hope that by the end of the evening that that's not true. We really need your help. I'd like to read to you a statement. It's actually to Gendon Rinchen, our guest of honor. It's a statement from Melissa and Harrison Ford that arrived the day before yesterday. We are sorry we cannot be with you tonight to welcome Gendon Rinchen to the San Francisco Bay Area. We spent a day with Rinchen in New York this week and another few days with him in Washington, D.C. in September. There is this reoccurring image that sticks in our minds from those last 2 meetings. Rinchen's face with the New York cityscape as a backdrop, or the White House as a backdrop. Rinchen has a wonderful face. Immediately, we remember Rinchen's face against a Tibetan horizon with the Potala or the Jokong as a backdrop. Same smiling face, but so many miles in between. The miles included a horrific arrest, a seemingly deadly internment, and somewhere over the Himalayas, an escape route to India. Rinchen did not fill in the details of those intervening miles, and we cannot imagine them. But to see our friend with Columbia University framing him, or our capital's government buildings backing him up, it makes us very happy. We welcome him with truly open arms to our country. One day, we plan on visiting him again in his. Signed, Melissa and Harrison Ford. Anybody see today's Chronicle? Now I have the East Bay edition, but the San Francisco edition has this at the top: Bay Area focus on Tibetan cause. Still on the newsstands, I think, until about midnight. It's a great story about how San Francisco Bay Area is a focal point for Tibet support in the United States. I just want to point out what this is doing here. It's very small. You probably can't see it. This is the Statue of Liberty, and there's a Tibetan flag tied to it. Well, His Holiness the Dalai Lama tied the Tibetan flag to the arm of the Statue of Liberty, to the torch of the Statue of Liberty. And then when it started to bend over, he said, "You see, liberty must be flexible." And he laughed, that special laugh that everybody's heard. We have it up here tonight because, well, tonight is really about freedom. It's about freedom for all of us. It's about freedom for Gendon Rinchen. Gendon Rinchen is a free man. And I think it just shows, it's incredible what people can do when they put their minds to it. People say that this cause is well, it is an uphill battle. They say it's impossible, but I say nothing is impossible. And the fact that Gendon Rinchen is sitting at a table right in front of me is proof of that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please applaud again. I'd like to welcome Chaksan Pa, San Francisco's own Tibetan opera and dance company, performing a traditional Tibetan opera piece. Thank you. Just before we do, I'd like to mention that on April 27th, the International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet is going to be sponsoring a concert for Free Tibet here in Berkeley with Philip Glass, Mark Isham, Chaksam Pa, Peter Coyote as our Master of Ceremonies, Nawang Kechog, renowned Tibetan flautist, and special guests. I hope that everybody here will be able to attend the concert April 27th. More news about that later. You'll be receiving invitations in the mail. I'd like to ask our special guests to please come up and fill these seats. Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties. Please. Well, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Eva Herzer, the President of the International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet. Eva.
Thank you very much. How can we not dedicate ourselves to preserve the Tibetan spirit with what we have just seen? That beautiful sound, that beautiful culture. I feel the same way I felt in 1986 when by accident I had ended up in Tibet and I knew nothing about the culture, and I was simply so moved by the beauty of that culture and by the terror that I could see the Tibetans were experiencing inside their own country. We feel indeed very, very honored to be able to host this evening, to welcome you and to welcome our very special guest, Gendon Rinchen. Gendon's tremendous courage in pursuing the truth and justice under conditions which are terrifying, dangerous to life and liberty is truly awe-inspiring to me. I think in our culture we think of heroes as people in shining armor, people who are spokespersons for a cause, who are visible, who are charismatic, who make the headlines. I think people like Gendon are the real heroes. They're the people who pursue truth, despite the fact that it ends them up in jail, despite the fact that they may be tortured, despite the fact that they may lose their lives. That, to me, is real heroic behavior. And we see that very little, I think, in this world, in our world, and I see a lot of it inside of Tibet. We at ICLT see our mission as taking the information that Gendon and his compatriots bring out of Tibet and making the most effective use of that information which has been gathered at such high risk, to take it to world leaders, to take it into the world of diplomacy, to take it to the United Nations, to take it to our governments. We do this primarily through the United Nations process. For example, we attend the Human Rights Commission and the Subcommission on a yearly basis in Geneva, and in fact, Gendon will be testifying before the Human Rights Commission in Geneva. We go to world conferences like Beijing last fall, and I'm sure many of you have seen in the papers the kind of uproar that was created by Tibetans simply being there and speaking the truth. We will be going to Istanbul in June with a Tibetan delegation and bring the Tibetan issues to this housing conference, Habitat 2, which is the last of this world conference cycle that the United Nations is involved in for right now. There we will talk about the connection between culture, housing, destruction of housing, destruction of culture, and cultural genocide, and raise the Tibetan perspective from that angle in Istanbul, built on the relationships that we have created in Beijing and through our other work before. We're continuing to send petitions to the UN's Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions. As you may know, last year the head of that working group found that 39 Tibetans had been arbitrarily detained in violation of the standards set forth by the international community. We are continuing with our Environmental and Development Committee and are working through the World Conservation Congress to galvanize regional and international support for sustainable and environmentally sound development inside of Tibet. We're continuing with our political prisoner campaign, and just as Gendon Rinchen was freed, we hope that many more people will be freed through efforts of people like you and I. ICLT is an organization with approximately 400 members. We depend on you. We are lawyers and non-lawyers, and we use our unique skills to galvanize support within the legal system, within the political and diplomatic system. As members, you will be kept informed through our Tibet brief, which we send out once a quarter. And we try to not only bring you information, but also points of view, thoughts, arguments that are floating around the Tibet movement, to engage you all in the discussion of how we can, as supporters, help resolve the situation in a peaceful manner. Having tasted Chinese repression a tiny bit on my own body in Beijing, I am more aware and more appreciative than ever about how easy this work is for us. It really is easy for us. We really stand to lose nothing through it. And when we look at that and compare it with the tremendous danger that people put themselves into in Tibet, the danger that Gendon exposed himself to, and the danger that thousands of Tibetans are in every day, I think it is easy to recommit ourselves to this work. I think in many ways the fate of individual Tibetans as well as the culture lies in our hand, us as the international community. We have to act like a community of human beings. I think sometimes we forget what that is. We each act in our own little place, and we don't think of ourselves as interconnected as a human community. And I think it is only that spirit which is going to bring about the inevitable result that Tibet will be freed, because it is the right and the just thing. I'd like to give a very special thanks to Carol Brighton and to Stan Clark, who spearheaded the effort at ICLT to free Gendon. And I'd also like you to give a very special hand to Glenn Gilbert for all the work he put into making this event a success. I now would like to introduce a woman of tremendous integrity and tremendous commitment to the cause of human rights. She has served as director for Amnesty International San Francisco office since 1986 until last year, when she was appointed to be the Amnesty International director for the entire Western region. Please welcome Cosette Thompson.
Thank you. I am very honored to be here tonight, and especially happy to share this evening's celebration with so many remarkable human rights activists. Being here with Gendon Rinchen and Harry Wu, both smiling at us and with us, is truly what you might call the miracle of 1996. When the disappearance of the Panchen Lama was announced last year, Tibet came back into the limelight. Since then, many Tibetan and other human rights activists have been struggling to keep the media's and our attention focused on the context and roots of this tragedy. Such efforts require patience, courage, and tenacity. They reflect the humility of those who teach against forgetting. They reflect what our honored guest is all about. What Gendon Rinchen said when he testified before members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committees last fall should become required reading for anyone studying peace and diplomacy. Gendon Rinchen also stated at that time, meaning last fall, and I quote him, "My case is insignificant compared to most others who have been arrested." We certainly accept the truth of this statement, but we reject its underlying message that you may not deserve our infinite gratitude and admiration. There is no such thing as only a few months in prison. We know that since your release 2 years ago, you have endured many more hardships, including exile. And we know that although, quote, you were just a tour guide, as you like to say, your fight and your example has inspired and continues to inspire many of us. Amnesty International is particularly grateful to you for agreeing to this one-month U.S. speaking tour and for being so generous with your time. Please join me in welcoming Gendun Rinchen.
Well, thank you very much for everything that you did, especially for saving my life. When I went back to Tibet, in a way, I'd never meant to make you people work so hard for my release. But anyway, the circumstances made me to take such a course. And I mean it, when I went back to Tibet in 1985, I wasn't ready to take such a initiative. Being in Tibet for 10 years, the Tibetans who came across me taught me a lesson to think as a Tibetan. So I did nothing more than being as a Tibetan in course of these 10 years. I have no regret for being in Tibet, and in a way I will say for making you people to work so hard. This, should I say, my case is an example, I will say, with much pride, that if a case, or should I say, the Tibet issue itself is taken seriously, sincerely, and with good motivation, international pressure works on China. So I am a living proof. When I was in the prison, I never dreamt, because I was monitoring the Chinese system since 1985, and especially on human rights since 1987. In course of this, I made many friends inside Tibet and outside Tibet. Primarily, they have been my gurus or teachers. And I have a special message from Tibetans inside Tibet. They believe that Western countries can change the fate of Tibetans. And I think because of this very spirit, they have been able to resist the Chinese rule. But as on today, no positive initiative has been taken to solve Tibet issue. And especially for Tibetans in Western, I will request them, or should I say Tibetans in exile, I will request them to visit Tibet first and then say what should be done, or then think what should be done about Tibet. I feel, out of my experience being in Tibet for over 10 years, the immediate action or the requirement is how to release about 700 political prisoners, and at the same time how to see Tibet being not converted into a military zone. Again, I would like to thank you all for everything that you did for Tibet, especially for me. Otherwise, I would not be here today. Again, thank you very much.
That he's just a tour guide is a bit like His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying he's just a monk. I realized that I've left 3 people out that I'd like to thank, and we sort of have to move along. You can see we've got a packed house here, and then I'll tell you about one slight change in the program. First of all, I'd like to thank someone who's not here, and you all know who she is. She's the founding president of the organization. I don't think I even have to mention her by name. The other person is John Mayer, who is here, the executive director. If it wasn't for those 2 people, this organization would not be here, and I'd like to thank John Mayer, founding executive director of the International Committee of Lawyers for Tibet. John, where are you? Could you stand up for a second? There's John. Finally, I feel like the guy who won the Academy Award and forgot to thank his wife. I'd like to thank Tori Gilbert, who's sitting in the middle there, who I've kind of I haven't been seeing a lot of this past few weeks. I just want to say thank you to Tori. I'll be home tomorrow. Just a slight change in the program. I don't think you'll mind. It actually seems quite apropos, and that's how the universe works sometimes. Harry Wu has been generous enough to come here tonight and catch a red-eye tonight for New York. And so he has to get to the airport. It seemed right to have Gen and Rinchen followed up by Harry Wu. Please welcome Harry Wu.
I'm very sorry, my time is run out. My departure time is 10 o'clock to New York. So I'm very happy to be here, especially I finally find another counter-revolutionary colleagues. And he committed the same crime as me, stealing the state secrets. And I hope everybody join with us, continually, constantly stealing the Chinese communist state secrets. We have to expose the ugly truth of the communism, and then we can learn how we deal with it. Today, the world is talking about human rights violation in China, and particularly focus on a number of the well-known dissidents, try to rescue them, try to free them. It is very important. A person, just like a drop of the water, can reflect the whole world. But I want to emphasize to you today, we should not only try to free someone from the code killing machine, suppression machine, but also we have to stop the machine, end the machine, destroy the machine, the Chinese Lao guy. There's a map. You can find it over there. How many labor camps today in Tibet? How many labor camps today in China? And everyone in this hall denied the Soviet Gulag, condemned Hitler concentration camp. Can you ignore Chinese labor camp? There's never happened in the Tibet history. There are so many. We identify more than 12 large prison camps today as is in Tibet. Millions of people today in Tibet and China suffering in this Gulag system. We have to tell the Chinese communists, stop it. At present, there's a debate. What is American China policy? And I just want to make a little bit my comments about it because I have very small time. I just want to raise some question for you thinking about it. Soviet Union, as an evil empire, as an evil communist, never enjoyed most favored nation trading status. But Chinese communists all the time enjoy the most favored nation trading status. Why? China is angel communism, angel empire, so we have to treat it differently. The Western companies boycott South Africa because human rights abuses. Is Chinese human rights violation, human rights records better than South Africa? Why we allow Chinese military company do business in the United States? They sell 2 million pieces AK-47 in the United States. They're purchasing the high tech to advance their military system. 10 years ago, they are not available to advance their missile system. But today, they can sell precise missile system to Iraq and Iran. Some people say, we have to deal with them because they have a missile system and nuclear weapon system. Yes, we have to deal with them. And some people say, China have a huge market. If we don't go, Japanese will go. Germany want to go. And some people say, what we can do is a huge population country. Maybe only helping them developing their capitalism. Maybe the capitalism finally can defeat the socialism and the communism system. And capitalism can bring the democracy and human rights back to China. Is that true? Is capitalism mean democracy at all? If do trade with Chinese communists, if we make investment in China, can helping the Chinese have a better future, why you didn't do any business in Soviet Union? I think this is a very serious issue today in our political stage. China will become an economic giant in next few years, in next century. But very few people tell you, economic giant also mean military giant, also mean political giant, and it is a communist giant. And then how you handle it. The people just got a kind of relax. They saw the Berlin Wall was peacefully turned down. But if next century there's another communist giant as this in the East, what you can do. Thank you.
Harry Wu. Our next guest really needs no introduction. None of these folks need really much of an introduction. Everybody knows former Governor Jerry Brown, founder of We the People. Please welcome Jerry Brown.
I don't have to take an airplane, but my car is in a zone listed tow away at 9 p.m. tonight. So I'm a little late, and I'm hoping the meter maids of Berkeley will indulge me. Now, meter persons. Meter fascists, more appropriate. As far as I'm concerned, whatever their gender, they're oppressive. It's the only efficient thing government does today, is impose traffic tickets. So with that bit of anarchy, now the only reason I'm here is because I provided an hour radio show today for this topic. I haven't done anything else. I haven't contributed any money, haven't gone to jail, haven't really done anything. So I'm here as kind of the parsley on the potato. Just got to sprinkle it in case nothing else shows up. But I will say this, because Harry Wu said why, so I know why. I know why that the human rights violations in China are not viewed as anything to be taken seriously. Because it's, I want to say this as cleanly and as clearly as possible, it's the money. Follow the money. And it's true that Boeing and Nike and toys, I mean, if you take what he said seriously, what are you going to do next Christmas? Since, what is it, $13 billion of the toys come from China? The fact of the matter is that the American government is already owned by China, and by anybody else who will pay the price. That is a fact. And when Ron Brown and Mickey Cantor and all the rest of those criminals go over there to Southeast Asia to steal the oil of Indonesia and make their deals with whomever they can make their deals with, that is the essence. And you don't even have to go to China. You can go to South Berkeley or Oakland and see a level of oppression that is different but very related to the oppression in Tibet. And that is that people who happen to be different from the people with the power are having their lives destroyed. And that's happening here, and each one of us in our own way are contributing to that enterprise. All the people that cheer say, oh, if only Buchanan will be beaten and we'll get Bill Clinton and the anti-crime bill and the anti-terrorism bill and the most favored nation clause for China and all the rest of that stuff. You see, if you really want to step back, there are not any innocent bystanders here, because we are implicated in a system which, for our own prosperity and security, we validate by our money, by our occupation, by our consciousness. So I just want to congratulate all of you for having the imagination and the generosity for identifying with people who are so different and so far away. But I want you to see that their struggle and their suffering and their destruction is no different from people who live very close to you, because we are all involved in the destruction of ourselves, because that's the path we're on. And the people who have suffered in prison camps in China or in Tibet are just a part of the larger humanity that is being destroyed. And unless we can overcome the consciousness of buying and selling, and let's call it what it is, we're really talking about capitalism, aren't we? And what is that? That's always getting more than you give. Isn't that the essence of it? Because that's called profit. And if you just make sure that in all your relationships you always take more than you give, then you will be part of the system that validates the very mentality that says we can't have Tibet independent and separate from the great Chinese empire. Just like we can't have Mexico or Central America separate from the hegemony of the American empire. I mean, that's the way it is. And the struggle of those people in Tibet is our struggle, because we ourselves either are the victims or will become the victims or are very closely associated with that level of what? Domination or insensitivity or intolerance or prejudice. And I wish it were that there were a few politicians that were the guilty parties only. The system is much deeper than that. It is embedded in ourselves. And as we can understand that and dig it out of ourselves, we'll be in a position to change what is around us and then maybe even our own world. Tibet is being destroyed, but so is the best part of America being destroyed. So is the planet being destroyed. And if we could just step back from it, see it, smell it, feel it, then we may find that spirit that will unite us in opposing not just the oppression of Tibet, but the oppression of African Americans here, the oppression of native peoples in Ecuador and Latin America that are being destroyed by our own companies, Exxon and Chevron. We can go over the list. We don't have to do that. But just the fact that you're here for Tibet is already a step. It's a link. It's a touching of the spirit of being a human being, which is the spirit of understanding suffering. If we understand that, then we can overcome it. Thank you.
Well, we checked. His car is still here. Speaking of Pat Buchanan, last night I saw Yo-Yo Ma in concert, and I met with Yo-Yo Ma after the concert to discuss Tibet. He happens to be a Tibet supporter. He said to say hello to Gendun Rinchen. He'd actually heard of Gendun Rinchen through our work and through Amnesty International's work, and he told me the following joke. He said, did you hear his acceptance speech in New Hampshire? He said, I thought it sounded better in the original German. It's Yo-Yo Ma. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who I've never met until tonight, but he taught me about world religion when I was a junior in college. Again, I don't think he needs much of an introduction. Everybody knows Professor Houston Smith.
Like everyone else in this hall, I regard the virtual destruction of Tibet by China as one of the tragedies of our century. Even so, I think that in situations of conflict, it is always wise to ask ourselves whether there is something in the position of the opposition that we can sympathize with. I was born in China and grew up there and saw with my own eyes some of the suffering that China has endured from the West. And certainly we're in no position ourselves to point fingers at nations that seize territory from others. Even so, the question in our multicultural age is whether political unity requires annihilating differences within the land. Today, the Tibetan people are the anvil on which that issue is being hammered out. In this, their darkest hour, we can draw some hope from two quarters. First, there is the courage and the fortitude that the Tibetans in exile are displaying. And second, there is the international lawyers for Tibet, who, with their ally, Amnesty International, is doing everything in their power to see that this issue is resolved in as humane a way as possible. They deserve our unstinted gratitude, admiration, and support. Om Mani Padme Hum.
Trying to please two constituencies here, sound and film. We'll try to compromise. Next, I would like to, first I'd like to thank Houston Smith for being the first speaker to actually keep to the time that we asked him to. Thank you. We have probably about 30 more minutes, and what I'd like to do is have question and answer. We still have a couple of speakers left, and then we can answer your questions. If you would like, you can write them down on the forms that are at your tables and pass them to a volunteer in the back corner or to Dean Alpert at this table over here. Any board member can pass them to Dean Alpert. We'll try to get to them. Well, next I'd like to introduce, it's a great pleasure because I first met Jaming Norbu in Dharamsala, sitting around at a couple of restaurants, the Himalayan Hotel and the Tibet Hotel. We had a great time in Dharamsala. It's great to see him again here in Berkeley. Jae-myung is a renowned Tibetan author, intellectual, and founding director of the Amni Machen Institute. Jae-myung Norbu.
I'd like to thank the ICLT for having me here this evening. It's a tremendous privilege for me here to be here on this occasion to honor Gyaltsen Rinchen. I'd like to say that this privilege to be in this very distinguished panel here, not even distinguished, I think I can use the word heroic, is somewhat unnerving for me. So I don't think I'm going to say very much. But let me, primarily because I am in a position myself in the Tibetan exile world of a writer, a journalist, an observer, and not actually much of a doer. So maybe it's best if I just added a few footnotes to what has been said and maybe illuminate some things a little more. Now, Gyaltsen here is not only just a symbol, I think, of all the prisoners, and he has mentioned the number, about 700 prisoners of conscience inside Tibet, but he symbolizes, for me, in some ways, the memories of tens, even hundreds of thousands of Tibetans who perished in forced labor camps in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and whose bodies exist in some wretched, unmarked grave in the Changtang in Tibet, and whose memory we have never really had the opportunity to honor. Now, Gyaltsen has managed a very miraculous escape from some prison in Tibet. But let me just talk about even a bigger prison that exists, and that is Tibet itself. Just a little digression. I happen to be a publisher, one of the publishers and part-time editor of a large Tibetan newspaper, Tibetan language newspaper. And I think it was last year that one of my informants in Nepal sent me this photograph. It was not a very good picture, a bit out of focus, but it was of a dead man. A dead man on a Himalayan pass. It was a very pathetic and very moving figure. He had sort of huddled up. He reminded me in some ways of the figure that some of you may have seen, this photograph of this Neolithic man that they discovered in a glacier somewhere in the Alps. He had the same rictus grin, and he had those wide awake kind of eye sockets. But this man in the Himalayas hadn't been dead for 2,000 years. Someone who had just died maybe the year before. Now this person was trying to escape from Tibet, which is a big prison, which is still, I think, in this world, one of the largest prisons, one of the largest areas that is still under the oppression of a totalitarian power. Now, it's not only this person. I have been in a position to see and talk to even children who have tried to make this attempt to escape from Tibet. And since the mid-80s, there has been, indeed, I think I could call it a wave of refugees who are trying to escape Chinese tyranny inside Tibet. Now, one of the many routes that is used by these escapees is across the Himalayas at a point near Mount Everest. And they escaped from the district of Shekar, which is in western Tibet, across into places like Solokhombu. And they use this pass called the Nangbala. And they managed to do it because there are no Chinese patrols out there. And there are no patrols for the very good reason that it is one of the most inhospitable areas in the world. It is utterly desolate. It's over, I think, 18 or 19,000 feet above sea level. It is very, very dangerous, and not a single Chinese soldier patrols that area. Last year, a friend of mine, a Swiss journalist, photographer, he followed a father and a little daughter. And the girl was only about 10 years old. And they tried to make that escape because the father wanted his little girl to have a decent education in exile, a Tibetan education. And they just about made it when they got to Nepal. The father had frostbite. The little girl was tougher. She had managed to survive. And she got into a Tibetan school. But there are a lot of other children, and I've seen little tykes of 10 or 11 with no toes, no fingers out there. And of course, I've never really seen all the dead people who never really managed to escape. And this is not just a short, dramatic escape. It takes at least a couple of weeks. And it requires tremendous toughness, determination, and the real desire for freedom that sometimes I think maybe is lost in this greater world. So that is Tibet. It is a vast prison. I think Professor Thurman has talked about some of the conditions there. But let me just add a little to what he said about the problems that Tibetans face, especially in Lhasa city, where you have hundreds of Tibetans with no jobs, thousands indeed, and the jobs are being taken away by the Chinese. A recent escapee just told me, he said, there are 2 jobs that's still available that the Chinese haven't really touched. One is the job of a monk. There were a class of monks in Tibet who used to go around to families whenever they had some illness or they required some kind of good luck in some business venture and performed certain rituals and some services. And when they came to your house, you fed them and you gave them some money and thank you in an envelope. Now those people who did do shabdans, now the Chinese haven't got their jobs. Or there's another profession and which we Tibetans called Tomden. Basically they're undertakers. Some of you may know that Tibetans, it's not all over Tibet, but in certain areas we dispose of our dead by feeding them to vultures. Now, that profession still has not been taken by the Chinese, but nearly everything else is going and is going very fast. And in some ways one cannot just fault the individual Chinese. It's like an avalanche, it's like a landslide that's sort of sweeping us, and it is very real. The reality of Tibet is very, very grim, and I am in no position to make any kind of prophecy about what's going to happen in the future, but whether we're immediately going to get our independence or something wonderful is going to happen. But still, we Tibetans have been fighting this cause for a very long time. We have very little else except maybe our kind of stubbornness and, of course, the friendship and the support of our many friends out here, not only in the West, but everywhere else in the world. And I'd just like to say one thing. People have been talking all evening about how much can be done through all our friends out here in the West. And I, for one, do believe that we still have not really tapped this resource of friendship for Tibet to its ultimate. I'll tell you one reason, because I was out here in Berkeley itself in 1975 with the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts. And I was trying to spread the message of Tibet, maybe in an ineffectual way. And at that time, actually, I was booed. You know, the political atmosphere was totally different at the time. Or there was very little attention at the time. We could never have ever filled a hall like this with people with sympathy and understanding for Tibet. If we can do something like this tonight here in a hall like this, I think maybe in a few years, given time, given a lot of effort by everyone, we could maybe change things in a much bigger way. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to thank all of you just for having this interest in Tibet. I'd just like to say that the cause that you are supporting is a very, very worthy one. And in some ways, I am sure it will repay you in the end. Thank you very much.
Orville Schell is a noted China observer, author, filmmaker, and correspondent frontline, notably for documentary Red Flag Over Tibet, which many of you have seen. He's also been a very good friend of this organization over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, Orville Schell.
Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with Gendon Rinchen and all the rest of you. Earlier tonight, Bob Thurman said, he said, don't let the mind close and adopt an attitude of hopelessness. Now, I don't want to be an apostle of pessimism, But I do want to spend my few minutes here giving you what I hope is a realistic assessment of what I think Tibet is up against. And what it is up against is plainly and simply China. And without some at least cursory understanding of how things are going there and may go, we won't have a very clairvoyant ability to foresee Tibet's future. Many of you probably wonder, why can't this problem be solved? I mean, why would China want to get this repeated black eye in the international community? Why not just cut some equitable deal? Well, there are reasons why they haven't, and I think these reasons are nowhere more sort of freighted with tension than right now. I think the most paramount reason is China's deep and abiding sense of its own weakness, which feeds into another phenomenon which we see in a quite aggressive form right now, is nationalism. China has not only, I think, in many ways you can look in the revolution as a great sort of effort to Potemkinize some sort of a veneer over many decades of failure, suffering at the hands of the West. It's been mentioned here tonight. Professor Houston said something about it. And I think this is a very, very deep feeling in China, the question of face. There is a non-system system in China. There's no way for a leadership to reappoint a successor. It's just a scramble in the back room, and that is going on right now, with Deng being very elderly and losing a grip on the helm. And I think this just exacerbates the sense of uncertainty and weakness. It puts a higher premium on one of the few things that the Chinese Communist Party can turn to show as evidence of their efficacy, and that is to reunify the motherland. You hear this over and over and over again, the sacred motherland, and it happens to include, Inner Mongolia. Some people are even asking now, who gave away Outer Mongolia in 1927? Who is to blame for that loss of the piece of real estate? It includes Tibet, Manchuria, Muslim areas in Xinjiang. The degree to which China feels set upon and weak at its center is the degree to which it will cling to Tibet. It is also the degree to which it will thump the tub for nationalism. And we've seen this in relation to Taiwan and to Hong Kong. Because it must, in some sense, bear out that great dream of China's grandeur. It's really imperial dream, even though it rails against hegemony and imperialists and the litany. It's still within it has this memory of the past when it was ascendant and others were in a tribute relationship to it. This is very, very deep in China. Why can't the Tibet problem be solved? Well, I think the one reason which I think is paramount is that the question of giving Tibet autonomy, much less independence, simply doesn't play at home. There is no leader who will dare raise it, particularly now, where every leader is trying to puff himself up to appear strong, to jump on the nationalist bandwagon, to paper over the sense of profound weakness and uncertainty. And so, alas, Tibet is very much caught in what is going on in Beijing. There is no Hu Yaobang who in 1981 went to Tibet and had a very conciliatory attitude, might have really solved the problem. We don't even know who to turn to in China when we want to talk about Tibet. There's nobody in charge. And there's nobody who would risk talking to anybody in a serious way about it, because that is not what's happening in China today. So I think we find ourselves at a very parlous state in both China's history and its relationship to Tibet. China is not interested in problem solving right now. They're not interested in working it out, this great liberal myth, which is very American. Let's get together, you give a little, I'll give a little, we'll get this thing solved. That's not what's going on in China now. What's going on is an effort to win, to appear strong, not to yield, not to be pushed around. And Tibet, its success is that it has managed to hook into the rest of the world. It's been remarkably successful. The exile government has been remarkably successful. Alas, also this plays into China's sort of darkest, weakest place, that is international conspiracies set against it to divide the motherland and to disunify China, which is the historical experience that it found so humiliating over the past 150 years. So I fear that for now we're at an impasse. And I don't want to send you all home feeling too dark and gloomy. I think it's important to continue on. The world changes very rapidly in ways we can't foresee, and it changes often very, very quickly. And who would have expected 1989 when it happened? None of us. Who would have expected we'd be where we are now in 1989? Very few of us. So I just will close on this note of some circumspection. Nothing, I think, will happen immediately. And China's, the albatross around Tibet's neck is China. And until China works itself out in some fashion, I fear Tibet will not see any surcease from the problems that it now suffers so grievously under. Well, thank you very much.
Well, last but not least, Robert A. F. Thurman is Professor of Indo-Tibetan Studies in the Department of Religion at Columbia University, the author of several books on Tibet, including Wisdom and Compassion, The Sacred Art of Tibet, Inside Tibetan Buddhism, and Essential Tibetan Buddhism. Professor Thurman is the co-founder and president of Tibet House, and here he is on one of the last legs of his West Coast tour, which has included something just about every night in the Bay Area, it seems. Robert Thurman.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here speaking again to the larger group, and of course I'm honored in the presence of Gendon Rinchen and in the aftershock of Harry Wu, both of whom I admire enormously for their tremendous courage in standing up against the Goliath, one of the Goliaths on the planet, and also after Jerry Brown, whose discovery of the demon within, or exposure of the demon within, the soul, I think, is very salutary in this sort of thing, since we really cannot liberate Tibet without liberating ourselves from our own internal oppressor, the inner tyrant, as Philip Slater says, of our own delusion and our own greed and our own anger. I think that's absolutely true. The reason the United States is so sympathetic to poor China, of course, is because the United States, it was built on the genocide, a much larger genocide, the genocide of the Native American people on this continent over hundreds of years, and which in some ways still goes on, still is denied, still is justified. I went to Tibet with a gentleman. Recently I took a gentleman to Tibet, and in the context of our travels through there, the Bosnia thing was at its height, and people were, one evening were talking about Bosnia, turned to me and said, "You know, Bob, we sure are lucky that our ancestors killed off all them Indians back in America, or we'd be having those kind of troubles like Bosnia." And of course, he was arguing against the possibility. At the beginning, this was the beginning of the trip, he was arguing against even the thought that Tibet deserved to be free from the people who had, not because China had any legal right to Tibet, he didn't dispute that, the illegality of the Chinese occupation of Tibet, but he just thought since they had won it, conquered it, then it should be theirs by the power that they'd conquered it. It's the type of attitude this gentleman had. You'll be happy to know, though, that by the end of the trip, since he decided they mismanaged the place so badly, he decided that they didn't deserve it after all. That was a kind of a triumph for this type of a gentleman. That was quite a thing. It was quite a long debate we had there, bouncing around the roads of Tibet, the wonderfully modernized roads of Tibet after 50 years of Chinese progress. Those of you who have been there know what I'm talking about. The yaks would do much better on yak back still. Well, it's late, and I don't want to give you the full treatment. We'd be here for a couple of hours. I don't think you want the full treatment. I think what Orville said recently is good, to have a sobering view about the difficulty, of course, of getting China ever. I mean, I don't know what China is or who it is, actually. when we talk about China as this and China as that. I never can understand it. You know, who was this China? I see some sort of geriatric old character in a semi-comatose state who probably feels that if he let Tibet slip away, his liver would fall out. And therefore, he has no intention of doing it. And I feel that the theater of saber rattling and Taiwan invasion and Tibet accelerating of the genocide in Tibet by assimilation and by colonization is on the part of people who are trying to show this old man and his like cronies who really are living in another century that they are going to fix up this thing that nobody could fix up. Let's not forget that Mao said in 1950 that he would have 40 million Chinese in Tibet by 1960. But Mao didn't get 40 million Tibetans into China. Although there's an excellent article by Thurman Wangchuk that shows that the bureaucracy in Lhasa is, the bureaucrats are there ready to administer a population of 40 million. They've been waiting for the 40 million to arrive all this time. But the 40 million haven't, no one's been able to afford to put the 40 million into this rocky, stony place, you know. I always say, like, China is like Mao's Louisiana Purchase. But the problem is the Nebraska is 3 miles too high. There's no way to get the wheat out of it. There's no breadbasket there. There's no way to put those people there under any sort of subsistence situation. When I really became convinced about China's freeing Tibet, inevitably, was when I drove in eastern Tibet, all from Chengdu to Lanzhou, all up and down in common Amdo, mostly Amdo, but all in the area on the edge of the Tibetan plateau, and going down through river valleys and up again and down. We drove a couple of thousand miles. And everywhere you saw, just over the edge and up near the edge, China had tried to do some sort of agriculture, plowing and planting, and somehow turned it into an agricultural place, Tibet. But there's no way. Everywhere they failed. Everywhere they tried that, it had eroded, and the soil was destroyed, and it looked like a moonscape. And they had retreated back down, and then they tried some sort of little factory or industry or extraction of some sort of mineral or something, and then they'd created a horrible pollution mess, you know. And then all the trees were all like stripped off, and the rivers were silted, and although from higher up, trees were still choking the rivers as they were stealing them, cutting 24-hour shifts day and night, because I think they also know, the people who are actually there trying to deal with it know that their days are numbered of how long they're going to be able to hang on there doing that, frankly. So then I really became convinced that whenever the people downland in China no longer had this 19th century attitude that greatness and strength means having huge geopolitical image, you know, like big territory. I call it a kind of a sort of neurosis which I call map image identity fixation. You know, it's like you somehow go through life, you think that the thing in the map, and all those Chinese of that generation, they go around with like a feeling like somebody bit them in the back, as Orville said, because Stalin took away Outer Mongolia. He was more gutsy than the British, and he insisted on Outer Mongolia's independence when the British sold the Tibet down the river, you know, which the British did in exchange for their Hong Kong business. Even in in the early part of this century, when the British Raj people wanted the world to stand up for Tibet's independence, knowing that that would be a useful buffer and important to contain whoever would be in control in China after the Manchus. The Raj people knew very well the danger of the Chinese expansion there, and also the injustice and the destruction to Tibet, which some of them had come to like and admire. But never could they get this policy through Whitehall because of the Hong Kong British, who wanted the money from and were sycophanting away on whoever was in China. So they were not as gutsy as Stalin. But anyway, every Chinese feels badly that they lost Outer Mongolia, and I think Orville is right. People of that generation, it's unthinkable for them that they should not have that map image of themselves as a continental power up there against the Russians. But all I can say is not a logical argument, but Gorbachev did not give up the Baltic states or walk out of Czechoslovakia or give up the Ukraine, because he was a bodhisattva, or because he, I mean, maybe he did it because he wanted to come to the Presidio. That's possible. That was his secret motive. Who wouldn't want to go to the Presidio, you know? But I don't think he did it because he was a bodhisattva. The point is that in the 20th century, with the information age, with the information economy, with the factor of intelligence and creativity and ingenuity as being the cause of prosperity, and the factor that large armies controlling huge geopolitical territories spells poverty. It spells big map image, sort of macho sense of great shape. but poverty, uncreativity, arresting all your own people who have any intelligence and creativity and putting them in gulags, and working at basically managing sort of the slave labor population for outside creative entrepreneurs. And that's what the Russians found out. Now, the only reason I think the Chinese thing has gone on longer than the Russian thing is that the stupid government and the confused business people in our country have done what they did not do with Russia and with South Africa and others, and that is they have been given them everything, given those dictators everything that they want. And when I go to Washington, I'm appalled by the people in our State Department and Defense Department who come to those sort of intellectual types come in and say, oh, gee, if we don't sell them all of our military high-tech stuff, maybe they'll buy it from the Russians. That would be terrible. Then their army would be modeled on the Russians. They're desperate to have some sort of a Cold War kind of thing going on so that then the best thing to sell the Chinese is military equipment. You heard Harry Wu. Harry Wu is Chinese. Harry Wu told us that the one last danger on this planet before we move into the nice 21st century of the information age and everybody's playing on the internet, and everybody is totally chicken to go out on any battlefield, really and physically, which is the one saving grace. Before we get there, that's the last possible World War III right there, is China. There's no China. They don't even know what China is themselves. I bet you Deng Xiaoping never read Confucius's writings, Lun Yu. He doesn't know what Confucius said. He doesn't know his own culture, those communist types. They were not educated themselves. They're just a bunch of gangster dictators who are into control, and they want to be, tough, and they want to dominate everything around them. And before they lose control, if they have the equipment, the hostility of their own people who they're being suppressing so viciously for so long, they must deflect that hostility. And they will, of course, deflect it outside if they can before it gets them. So here we are, the supposed free world, who wouldn't give the Russians even a CD player or even a tiny little TV set or anything, and therefore brought them to their knees with desperation of wanting to watch the Waltons or the Melrose Place and join the happy party of the 21st century of bad soap operas. And instead, to the Chinese, we're feeding them, shoveling them everything out of some demented notion that that'll bring them round, Like it really is pathetic the way we have behaved. And we are directly responsible. Wei Jingsheng, I want to make a couple of positive proposals. Wei Jingsheng is back in prison because Bill Clinton is a wimp and he delinked human rights and the most favored nation status. What is the mystery? What is the mystery? I personally believe that the Bush administration, being there to kiss whatever part of Deng Xiaoping's anatomy would be presented, along with all the intellectual sycophants and sinologues and everybody running around the State Department, was the real reason that the people in Tiananmen Square were totally crushed. They could have definitely gone a different way. Zhao Jiang could, these things are a few individuals. This is not China, some big entity. Zhao Jiang was out there trying to talk to the students. He was sniffling a little bit. He had a little bit of human feeling left. Deng Xiaoping was running from place to place to try to find somebody who would slaughter the grannies. But they knew, he said, Wei Jingsheng, we had him in prison for years. They never said anything. They knew that old George would say, whatever you guys do. Henry Kissinger was on TV saying, wouldn't you want to clean the streets if there was a bunch of students camping in front of your White House? Why be mad with them? They're just cleaning their streets. They are totally licensed by this type of people in our own country. And they still are. And we, for example, our work, we try to work for Tibet House. Tibet House doesn't actually have a political agenda on purpose. We are supposed to try to save, His Holiness the Dalai Lama asked us to try to save whatever pieces of Tibetan culture we could, channel whatever funds towards the preservation of Tibetan culture by institutions in India, get as many people as possible around the planet to know there is such a thing as Tibetan culture and to know how fantastic and how beautiful it is, irrespective of what is going on politically in Tibet. Out of His Holiness's faith that there will be a time to replant in a free soil whatever seeds of that beautiful and amazing and marvelous and Buddhistic culture, not only Buddhist, but Buddhistic culture of Tibet. And we go to this corporation and that. We go to liberals even. And then they say, oh, gee, we don't know if we can support you because then we might not be able to support China. Then the Chinese would be mad. We don't know. Maybe we want to sell them something later. It's just completely confused. Meanwhile, they're not going to sell anything to the Chinese market. The Chinese are going to sell to their own market after they stole our equipment of how to make whatever it is. It's very clear. The International Lawyers Committee for Tibet is very clearly the right approach until the Chinese people have come into the world community and follow the rule of law in business and in politics and so forth. No one will make any money in China, much. Except, people who sell them like cattle prods and electric shock things to beat up the people in riot gear, then they make a little money. But no real money is going to be made. They're not going to be part of the world economy because they're a pirate economy still, really, basically. So it's and this is another very important I want to make, and that is that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is totally sincere in his concern for the Chinese people. He loves the Chinese people. He actually speaks Chinese. He was born on the border of China. The 13th Dalai Lama, if there is such a thing as reincarnation, the 13th Dalai Lama was made a masterful gesture in this coming history, taking rebirth in that place. It's like he put his purba down right where the Mongolian and the Tibetan and the Chinese peoples meet, and the Turkestani people bong, right there, right at the edge of Tibet he put it. Couldn't be a more clear border marker than the rebirth of the 14th Dalai Lama. So he really likes the Chinese people, and he laments the fact that by our outside people coddling the geriatric dictators of China who are really obsolete, and they have been as obsolete as Gorbachev saw the same type of dictators of Russia were obsolete. We are prolonging the misery of the Chinese people, and we are making the danger for China, which is a great also danger for Tibet. If the unraveling process, the perestroika process, the inevitable restructuring of this completely sterile society, where there's no trust, where every family member has been betrayed by another family member, where nobody has any much initiative and trust except a few really sort of gang kind of mentality. That if the unraveling process is delayed too long, so that then the unraveling goes in the form of a kind of avalanche, a kind of fragmentation, a splintering, then the misery there will be really quite beyond. It will be remarkable, and he totally doesn't want that, the Dalai Lama, His Holiness. He absolutely doesn't want that. If they could restructure in a more systematic way, it would be so much less painful for everyone. So the one thing of the Tibet movement is not a hate movement. We don't hate the Chinese people. His Holiness's prayer of human rights, he feels sorry for the people who do these cruel and atrocious things. And he means that. That's, of course, when you get to know the Dalai Lama, you're amazed by the fact that he means that. It's not just some sort of nice religious window dressing. So that's why, I tend to speak about, so therefore my only argument, Orville and everyone, about how China will let go of Tibet, and I believe soon, I personally think it'll happen in a blink of an eye. The only thing I can say is in 1989, when His Holiness got the Nobel Prize, when when Honegger was still in charge in East Germany, when the Velvet Revolution was going on in Czechoslovakia, who would have ever been able to stand up in front of a group of people and say, yes, and then 1 or 2 years, Soviet Union will have receded, Henry Kissinger is all wet, and he should go on vacation. Big powers do dissolve, do deconstruct. They do reach a point of recognizing the futility of a certain way of life because bankruptcy forces them into it. No one could have made that argument, right? And we saw it just happen, just unravel, much to the chagrin of our own cold warriors such as George Bush and company, who were deeply upset by this. And they are now trying to increase the defense budget and terrorize the Russians and hope for a reaction in Russia so we'll have a nice Cold War again. Then they can go back to business as usual. Sadly, the people we're letting still run our country, we haven't booted them out. We foolishly think they won. Right? We won. Meanwhile, Reagan bankrupted us totally with that military budget, and we are bankrupt now. So we did not win, actually. So my argument for Tibet is that it's impractical to try to live in Tibet for the Chinese. They won't be able to take a subsistence livelihood, but they can steal everything movable in Tibet. All the borax, some of my drivers, when I went out in western Tibet last summer, they were telling me they were stealing all the borax in western Tibet, sending truck after truck and taking shovel after shovel of borax from western. They'd gotten to the level of taking all the borax in huge ton by ton by ton. You know, the trees we know, everything they can take, they will. But they won't be able to colonize. They'll drain the Yamdrok Lake, but they won't be able to colonize when someone downland no longer wants to pay that huge subsidy to keep those colonists up there. They will all leave, I feel sure, because of that altitude. So I don't think it's just a Pollyanna idea, it's a practical idea, that it will be once again free, then we'll have to rebuild it. And the reason for that, for us to maintain that vision ourselves, and not to get sunken in despair, and not to reify some entity like China as if it were a thing, and realize they're individual fools running around like the individual fools we have over here, like we have around our own households, you know, like individual fools who stubbornly persist in something when we know it's not working, you know. It's very important for us to keep that, because the only way we're going to succeed in this amazing liberation movement that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is that, like, you have to realize it's something truly unprecedented. He's like a Gandhi in a situation where it's a minority versus a vast majority, which is different from Gandhi. He's like the information age liberation movement. Tibet will be free when the minds of the people on the whole planet are free of all kinds of hungover 20th century violent attitudes, which we will grow out of more rapidly than people think, because we will not survive if we keep them. The sort of egotism and violence level that we're used to in our sort of gun-toting 19th and 20th century have no longer any survival value to us. In fact, they are totally self-destructive. And that's why we will realize this in a greater leaps than we can imagine. And when we do, Tibet will be free. And Tibet is also not far away from us, I want to say one thing. There's nothing remote or far away. Jerry thinks Tibet is far away. But Tibet is just right here with us. Tibet and the people in Oakland and the people in the Lakota Reservation and Hopi Land are all just right here with us right now. And their suffering is spoiling our fun. And when they only will we have some fun when they no longer are suffering, and it will all have to come together, I feel. And we should not lose that vision. And because you would not be here supporting Tibet if you didn't have a vision that there's some unique and amazing thing that is emanating in this amazing Don Quixote adventure of liberating, we're helping the Tibetans themselves, rather, I should say, to liberate themselves from this most extraordinary oppression that they suffer. So, but to keep at it, we cannot do it on the energy of desperation alone, on the energy of, oh, it's terrible, horrible, we have to go and do it, because there's too much desperation everywhere if we sink into reality of desperation. It's a Buddhist teaching that true compassion, which means effective compassion, true compassion does not mean just sitting and going, oh God, how horrible it is, they're suffering, and just sinking into this mire of suffering with the people. True compassion means being agonizingly, totally sensitive to the suffering of people, at the same time as seeing beyond that suffering to the release of that, the transformation of that suffering. True compassion must become bliss, joy, the intensity of releasing beings from suffering, or it will not be compassion, because compassion is not just wallowing in suffering with others, it's removing the suffering from them. And to do that, your motivation has to come from joy. And the joy is this dance here that took place tonight. And by the way, nobody has mentioned Happy Tibetan New Year to everyone. We are in the first 2 weeks. We are in the first 2 weeks of the Tibetan New Year, the fortnight from the New Year to the 15th day of the lunar month. We're getting near that full moon. And in that time in Lhasa, for the last 590 years, the Tibetans would gather and quit all business. They would drop all, they'd have 2-week vacation, paid vacation for everybody. And they would pray, and they would look at have visions of the Buddha, and they would dance and sing, and they would celebrate the miraculous presence of joy and enlightenment in the world, as opposed to the usual grimy, grisly business, which they also, of course, had in their own society. But they had this kind of celebratory thing. So we somehow have that atmosphere and vibration in this wonderful New Year's time. So it's joy. We must keep alive the joy of that dancer with his, whoa, that sound, you know. It's that eerie sound in the midst of, full awareness of horror and difficulty and misery of life, that completely wild and ecstatic joy. That's the joy with which we can non-violently see to the freedom of these people. Now, next year, I want to announce to the San Francisco Tibet support community that Tibet House in New York, whose job is this cultural thing, we have developed something here, but we don't mean to be encroaching on your territory. We invite all of you to work with us. We hope ultimately, we started doing it out of a vision of having a beautiful Tibet museum, monument, jewel box in the Presidio, in the context of a celebration of all the cold, magnificent tapestry and carpet and quasi-quilt of world cultures, all sort of preserved in their beauty and their uniqueness, which the Presidio should be if it wasn't for a few politicians. That the Presidio should be the center of the sort of the 21st century vision. I mean, I think it's really important. There are people working on it that's sort of been stalled and stymied by the Grinch who's trying to steal Christmas. You know who I mean. And so that was the original inspiration, and in the light of doing that, His Holiness agreed to come here in the next June. Originally it was this June, but then it's June of '97. We have firm dates, and he is going to come here to sort of celebrate Tibetan culture. But the way he's going to celebrate Tibetan culture is, we did it here in San Francisco, the Wisdom and Compassion show, about 5 years ago, sort of the art and this beautiful, many of you I hope saw it. That show is now going to Germany and Japan and Spain. But what His Holiness is going to do when he comes here is he is going to meet with the people who are working in South Oakland, the gang members, the ex-gang, hopefully mostly ex-gang members. I'm not sure how safe the real active ones would be. The wife battering shelter people, the addiction people, the prison counselors, people who are working with the most oppressed people here in this society. People of color who in our initial representatives have been talking with these groups of people who never heard of the Dalai Lama and never heard of Tibet. And His Holiness is changing a lot of things in his schedule, as you all know. Probably all of you have tried to invite His Holiness to 10 things in the last, His Holiness actually has no time to probably more or less do anything. We're all frustrated, aren't we, all the time by that. But he wants to do this because he's never really come up against the really oppressed people here. And his teaching of selflessness and his teaching of nonviolence and Shantideva and compassion and solving things with tolerance rather than anger and so forth, he hasn't had a chance to measure that against the people who actually go into the streets of Los Angeles and Oakland and try to deconstruct gang violence, try to get the guns out of the schools, try to develop emotional intelligence in small children who come from abusing families where they've been beaten and witnessed the beating of their mother and so forth and so on. So this is a new sort of unique and different program that His Holiness will come to do here in your Bay Area. And I hope you will all join with us in trying to make this an amazing experience and a place where the broader citizens of California, who will not necessarily at first have known about Buddhism or about Tibet or about even the Dalai Lama, will recognize the sort of closeness of Tibet and Tibet's experience of dealing with these difficulties and Tibet's example of standing up to oppression without violence. And Tibet will get a new level of recognition in the American public, we hope. With your help, we hope we can do this. So anyway, that's all I thank you, and I hope we have a number here which is 415-381-2815, where anybody who's interested in cooperating in any way with this, supporting or cooperating in any way with this program can get in touch. And we hope the Lawyers Committee will work with us, and the Bay Area Friends of Tibet, and any of the cultural people here, and we hope everyone will work together in unity, which is not always the case in the Tibet movement, as the old-timers will know. But we hope that we can have this time of unity in your wonderful Bay Area. So anyway, lo sa tashi dele, and have a good and happy New Year of the Rat.
I'd like to invite back up Professor Houston Smith, Eva Herzer, Tashi Dundup from Chaksampa, please. The current bid on Galen Rowell's photograph has gone up from $600 to $601. I'm going to say going once, going twice, and then as soon as the questions are over, it'll be gone. If somebody wants to jump up right now. Okay. The first question, sort of on a serious note, is where are the momos? Now we asked the Berkeley City Club if they could do that, and the closest they came was spinach and cheese ravioli. However, I'd say to this person, come to the concert for Free Tibet, and we'll have momos for you on April 27th. The second question is addressed really to Tashi Dundup. Tashi, please, come on out. Okay, the question is, yeah, come on up here. What was the story behind the dance?
I thought there was no explanation. It's a 500-year performance tradition, purification of stage. It's before the Tibetan opera. We call it Hamu, or the goddess place. And it is to get rid of all the negatives and purify the land. And I think here maybe to symbolize purify and then energy, more energy.
The next question is to Mr. Shell and any others who would like to answer it. There is one theory that with the end of Deng Xiaoping's life, China's ability to hold on to its areas further from the center, and Beijing will further weaken, and Tibet will be in a stronger position to revolt and then negotiate for more freedom. Could you please comment? Whoop, did we lose Mr. Orville Shell? But I see Jiaming wants to answer the question. So, would somebody like to answer the question? Bob, would you like to take a shot at it, or? No? No? Okay. For all participants, are you supportive of a boycott movement to support Tibet? Love, Milarepa.
Sure.
Go ahead, because I think maybe we can hear from somebody from over here. Supportive of a boycott.
Well, according to my experience of touring 8-9 countries, I feel that trade boycott of China looks not very simple. In Europe, almost 60% of the market is filled with Chinese goods. But if all such an initiative is taken, maybe you could start with toys being produced in China.
Yeah, I think a boycott is just the right thing, and revoking most favored nation status until Wei Jingsheng is released, and until Tibetan human rights are respected and prisoners are released, I think we should get really tough with them. I think we should urge our politicians and business people to get really tough. And obviously, it's going to be hard to spread that idea. It have to be done slowly but surely. But who could not be in favor of it? You know, how can you justify it? Not only that, but these toys a lot of them are made by American entrepreneurial efforts and Chinese slave labor, and therefore the labor is enslaved. And there's no justification for it, I think, for any reason. And it should all be boycotted, as we boycotted effectively South Africa and Russia. And we should do that with China. I don't know why this is such a mystery.
I'd just like to announce that in January of 1996, on January 13th, right here in Berkeley, the Tibetan Economic Action Coalition announced that it was forming. Finally, after 5 years of talk, there's one organization that's going to organize boycott issues, economic action issues, most favored nation issues, World Trade Organization issues. And anybody who'd like to could call the Milarepa Fund and talk to John Dennison if you're interested in getting involved with the boycott. I think we'll forego the last couple of questions and just make a quick presentation to our guests. The first is to Gendon Rinchen. As people go out, if you haven't already got one of these, please grab one. It's a bit of a historic document at this point. When ICLT first started the Gendon Rinchen campaign, we put out a brochure saying Gendon Rinchen needs your help. And one of the things that was inside of that, it said Tibet's #1 tour guide is missing. It's quite ironic to think about it now. What we've done is we framed on my right, the original Gendon Rinchen poster, which we stamped released after he was freed, and then the invitation to tonight's evening for Tibet in honor of Gendon Rinchen. Gendon? Remember those ties I was talking about? We have some guests, some gifts for our guests, our special guests. Professor Smith? Jemeng Norbu? Tashi Dondup? Gendon Rinchen? Robert Thurman? We'll send these to Jerry Brown and Orville Shell. Well, we'd like to end the evening. We got it worked out. We'd like to we've got a new bid. This is good. This is good news. This is great news. The bid has just gone up to $750 for Galen Rowell's photograph. Going once. Going twice. I've never done this before. This is fun. I have a hammer. I need a hammer. Last chance for the person who was at 601. Sold. Thank you very much. Cindy, could you bring the photo up and we can say the name of the person if they'd like, and we play one last song. We'd like to welcome back Chak Sampa, Tashi Dondup, and the Tibetan National Anthem.
So, as I'm a Tibetan, so traditionally I'm offering a Tibetan scarf to Gindu Rinjala. The Tibetan scarf has significantly, is white, significantly peace and long life and long friendship, and also smooth is non-violence. So a lot of the significant together are offering to the Gindu Rinjala to welcome, and we really happy, enjoyed to be here tonight together, and we also, I really appreciate, thank you very much supporting for Tibetan cause, you all, and ICTL, and BRF in Tibet, all the Tibetan friends here. And also, this significant, tonight we are celebrating Gindu here, free from China, and here, and we will be soon, hopefully we all be back in Tibet and free. And so also pray for long life, His Holiness Dalai Lama, and free Tibet. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Andrew Delaney, who just brought this beautiful Galen Rowell photograph.
I think just like American national anthem, this is about Tibetan national anthem. I think people have to get up or something.
Well, finally, I just would like to say to all of you who didn't get to see what a beautiful sight it was to look from up here down there, thank you very much, and free Tibet.